Nebraska's winter transfer haul is complete. And 2 months ago, could you have ever imagined it would look like this? Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sports Book. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, welcome. It is Monday. Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone here. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. There was not a football game this weekend for the first time since August. It was, I felt like it was kind of freeing a little bit. We have one more football game left, but soon enough we will miss the Saturdays and Sundays being filled up.
Do you consider the Senior Bowl to be a football game?
I do not. I apologize to the participants and the people who care about the NFL draft, but just not my style. Nebraska basketball won this weekend on the road against a top 25 team.
Huge win.
Certainly noteworthy, getting themselves back into the conversation. And we have some breaking news right around the time of the start of the show, so we'll cover that throughout the show. But this segment is about another guy. It's about Rocco Spindler, the offensive lineman from Notre Dame who started 23 games. Notre Dame went to the national championship this past year. Took several visits, including multiple visits after he visited Nebraska, Pitt, and Virginia to finish off his visit run, but ultimately puts out a graphic on Saturday that he is transferring to Nebraska for his final year of eligibility, and it's a big pickup for the Huskers.
So when I saw the graphic, he was wearing number 50, and I thought, oh, Nebraska's got its center. Like, who wears number 50 if you're not playing center?
Conspiracy.
But then I looked a little deeper and see that Rocco wore number 50 at Notre Dame, at least in some photos that I found on the internet device. I mean, I think the possibility exists that Nebraska found its center. It may be asking him to slide into that position that Ben Scott manned last season. I think if you want to play center, that there's potentially a path to the NFL. It's maybe a more coveted position, premium position within the NFL than offensive guard. And Donovan Raiola, Nebraska's O-line coach, that's his expertise. He was a center. His brother was a center. And, I think that's the position he worked with before he became an offensive line coach, all five positions. I think Rocco would be doing well to pick Nebraska if that's, well, overall, but also if his plans are to play center. So we'll see on Saturday when Matt Rhule spoke to the media. He was asked specifically about the center position, and he hemmed and hawed a bit and talked about Sam Sledge and Justin Evans' ability to play center. He mentioned Jason Machachak too, but it could be Rocco. Welcome, Rocco, by the way. Never been a Rocco in Nebraska football history, I discovered.
That's actually true. I mean, it sounds true, but that's right? You confirm that?
Never a letter winner, that's for sure. There may have been some walk-on who was on the scout team and didn't earn a letter, but Rocco, good name, good football name. You can tell he's the son of a football player. His dad, Mark Spindler, played for a while in the NFL, was a defensive lineman at Pitt. So sounds like Nebraska's getting a football player, as Bill Callahan would call him. Bill Callahan would like this guy.
He's a good football player. So that's good. That's huge. I wonder, and part of what you heard Rhule talk about this past weekend, this is before Rocco publicly committed. By the way, remember the whole hang up on your 125, 126 thing?
Yeah. Susan knows.
Yeah.
I think she was counting him because I was like, where's the extra player?
Might have found your 126 there.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So that's where Nebraska's at right now. But Rhule talked about NIL and how they feel like they could be, competitive in pretty much any space. And when you're talking about a guy who has the experience that he does and the reputation that he does and comes from that team, Nebraska was certainly going to have to be competitive in NIL, and it sounds like they brought it enough to be able to get its commitment at the end of the day.
I don't know the number, but reading between the lines, some of the reports out there, and Rocco's dad Mark talked to Steve Sipple from On3 on Sunday after the commitment, and the number 1.5 million was thrown out as something that he had heard in or that had been speculated during this process. And Nebraska reportedly was very competitive with the top offers, not necessarily having the top offer, but very competitive. So I think we can safely say that he's a 7-figure guy, if not very close. He probably is a 7-figure guy, especially when you add in rev share. So that's a piece of this that Nebraska can talk to players about. You're getting something through NIL, but they're also going to get rev share because on July 1st, Nebraska can start to make those payments. So it's structuring a salary cap even before the money flows into the Nebraska rev share account. That's wild to think that you could have a 7-figure interior offensive lineman here in the year 2025, but that's where we're at.
Well, I think it's more amazing that Nebraska keeps coming up with it. Like whenever asked, feels like at this point, at this stage in the game, pre-rev share, right, that 1890, kind of comes through from. Like, my concern at the beginning of all this was Nebraska has so many needs and they need so many starter caliber players that I think it's just going to be difficult to be super competitive for all of them.
They're going to run out of money.
We don't know where their offers, ranked on each of the guys that they got. But if you're in the ballpark of where you need to be, and then you ultimately get the guy, I think that probably tells you something. Nebraska, I mean, this could be an episode one day or a topic one day, Mitch. I mean, they're going to have maybe as many as 8, 9, 10 starters that they just got in the transfer portal this year. And so you're going to have to pay a lot of money to get those guys. Nebraska came through. It's really impressive what they've been able to do both on the NIL front and then just identifying the right guys.
Yeah, we should put a little bit of a bow on this thing. That's 16 portal additions, and this is it. Nebraska's into the second week of the spring semester. Now, they may add they probably will add a player or two, I would expect, just based on needs or what injuries might happen in the spring. But this is it for the winter. The December-January period, Nebraska's done. It got 16. And, we go back to conversations that we had in December and we talked about the biggest needs. And of course there was defensive line, but I think offensive line probably with some clarity in viewing it now. Offensive line, especially knowing what we now know about the number of players who had surgery after the season on the offensive line. It was the biggest need. Like defensive line, yes, was huge because of several players left with Terrence Knighton and Tony White. But O-line, it needed to be addressed. And Nebraska has addressed it now with Elijah Pritchett, the Alabama transfer, multi-year starter, coming in to be a tackle, and Rocco Spindler, the Notre Dame transfer, multi-year starter, coming in to work on the inside. Like, these are very possibly Nebraska's two best offensive linemen, set to anchor the two areas of the line that you need to create a good line. So, wow. Just think back. It's February 3rd. Think back to December 3rd and the panic that had set in around Nebraska. And I'm not saying that I was above that. But Tony White had just left. Knighton was on his way out. Who knew what the next set of coaches were going to look like? Players were leaving. There was some questionable. There was some question about what this Nebraska roster was going to look like in February. And now it has the number 1 ranked transfer class in the Big Ten. That's according to 24/7 Sports, and the number 5 class in the country. So nice job. NIL. Nice job, Matt Rhule and staff.
Seriously, I mean, that's my main takeaway from all this, Mitch. If you are concerned about Nebraska not being competitive enough in the money space and the NIL space, then
I should say nice job 1890. Like that's
absolutely. You were and then Rhule talked, so you were wrong. I was definitely concerned about it. And now Rhule talked about it over the weekend. Like as they go into revenue sharing, they feel like that positions them potentially even better because, as Rhule said, they can, they can have the check there for them. Like it's not exactly how it works, but like they know they're not like trying to raise the funds after they already guarantee X amount of dollars to whatever player, which is really cool. It puts Nebraska in a I would assume relatively unique position depending on, the types of players that they're going after. So I think they feel really good about their operation over there right now, which they should.
Yeah. Okay. Let's cut this discussion because there's a lot to get to in the second segment, including the breaking news on Nebraska special teams coordinator. And I want to get into what happened on Saturday after Rhule talked about the spring game and how this story became a lightning rod nationally. That's coming up next on the Locked On Nebraska pod.
But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook, where Super Bowl 59 is indeed here. This week, one game, two teams, endless possibilities. No better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook here for the big game. Whether you predict that first touchdown or you predict an anytime touchdown score, two players in the Super Bowl are minus money for an anytime touchdown. Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts, minus 180 and minus 115. Respectively. Do you think Travis Kelce is scoring a touchdown in the Super Bowl?
Absolutely, yes.
125 right now on the FanDuel Sportsbook. So that's a pretty good value for you. So it's whether it's touchdown bettors, you could go first touchdown scorers as well, or live bets during the game. So you still have time to think about it and process things. And you can place that $5 bet right now and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. That is icing on the cake. Download the app, head to FanDuel.com right now and get started. Once again, bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's with FanDuel at FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59.
Welcome back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. Connor, you got me excited there. It's Super Bowl week. Mm-hmm. I am, I don't care who's playing. I'm looking forward to the Super Bowl. It's going to be a good Sunday.
Oh yeah, I'm good and fired up. I'm excited that I think this is the first time in a while that there won't be a home Nebraska women's basketball game on Super Bowl Sunday, nice. Which gives me all day to figure out what I'm going to do for food that evening and whatever. So, pretty excited for that. And
are you traditional? Go ahead.
No traditional
pizza, wings, food. Nachos. Where do you go?
But I want to have the feast. Whatever. Yeah. I'll take all the offerings that are put in front of me. So yeah, I am excited for Sunday, and I've gotten myself to the point where I am excited about the game, even though we're not super fired up about the matchup.
I don't know if other people do this, but I'm actually it's Monday before the Super Bowl, and I'm altering my diet here early in the week, like what I eat early in the week, so I can eat more on Sunday. Like I want Sunday to be a big day for. I don't even know what we're doing, but I know I'm going to eat a lot of food.
You want to go into Sunday like hungry,
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I got you. That's a good call. Yep. I do that sometimes too.
Yeah. Okay. We're just past 8 in the morning here on Monday, and right as we started recording, the news came out of Tennessee from On3 that Mike Ekeler is coming home. That's the report from On3. We heard from Matt Rhule on Saturday that Nebraska was still conducting interviews for its special teams coordinator, and that Phil Snow was leading the charge, and they still had people to talk to. And then less than 48 hours later, here comes the ex-Nebraska assistant, the ex-Kansas State Wildcat, the Blair, Nebraska native, Mike Ekeler, a ball of energy to apparently, reportedly, to coach the Nebraska special teams. So we'll track this as the day goes on. I'm sure our Tuesday edition will spend more time discussing the apparent hire of Mike Ekeler as the final piece of Matt Rhule's coaching staff. So on Sunday, he completes the transfer portal class, and here in the early hours of Monday, he's got the last assistant coach on this staff for the 2025 season. And I think people will be happy when if you're too young to remember Mike Ekeler on the Nebraska staff back in the in the 2000s era, I don't think he's changed much. This is a guy who used to basically run through walls as a player. He was a special teams. He was something special when it came to special teams in his playing career, and he specialized in this to continue to use the word special in his time as a college coach at many stops now.
Yeah, he's insane. That's great. That's a good thing. Honestly, I think that's a little bit of Nebraska needs. They need a crazy guy on the staff, and it's not just that he's the crazy energy guy. Like, his special teams units have been really good at Tennessee. There's some. So we're about to find out the answer to the question of bringing in one guy, making a good hire. Can it actually fix Nebraska's long national nightmare of having horrendous special teams overnight? Can this actually work?
Maybe this is why Matt Rhule low-keyed the thing so much in his conversation about special teams on Saturday, just saying, well, I think we need to fix the snapper and then we'll be good. Because he knew that Mike Ekeler was going to bring all the energy in the world, and Rhule didn't really need to do much else. Now, I say that, and when the dust settles on this, I'm going to continue to beat the drum that the head coach has to set the tone with special teams. Now, you might not need to as much with a guy like Mike Ekeler running the room, but it's got to come from the top down, and I think it will. And I think that's where Phil Snow helps with this too.
I agree. Okay, so the other thing that we wanted to get to here was, and we'll have more on Mike Ekeler and special teams as we learn more about it in the next 24 hours, and we'll have it for you tomorrow. But so Nebraska's, one of their headlines from over the weekend was Matt Rhule, basically coming forth and admitting, I don't think we're going to have a spring game. And then we actually got the media got a chance to ask Matt Rhule the question, okay, well, why? What's the reasoning behind this? And
I don't even know if we asked why.
He gave a reason.
He was going to talk about this on Saturday, no matter what. It was what's going on with the spring game.
He definitely gave a reason, and the first thing he immediately pointed to was, I don't want our spring game on TV because I got people calling our players afterwards after they watch the game on TV. I'm paraphrasing. And basically what he's pointing to is tampering. And I sort of found it maybe mildly surprising that he went there first, but generally innocuous in this day of where it's just all kind of, that feels like it's just happening everywhere. So you could blame that on that. But then what happened, Mitch, was many other people around the country found out that Matt Rhule was canceling his spring game due to tampering. And that's when the real fun started.
This is low-hanging fruit, and it's a weekend, like you said, that's slow in the news front on football. Sorry, NBA fans, I know it wasn't a slow weekend, but in terms of football, it was a slow weekend, and the college football community took the bait. It's almost like the old days with Nebraska football where the Huskers would periodically, almost like you could set your clock to it, just unnecessarily create drama. All kinds, we're canceling the Oklahoma game, that kind of thing. This is Matt Rhule generally avoids those kind of moments, but he kind of walked into the trap on Saturday by just going down the road immediately that this is about tampering, and tampering doesn't even exist. The word tampering doesn't even exist in college football anymore. It's just a free open market.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to say that. So maybe this was something where he knew that it was going to generate headlines. And that's exactly what it did. So this is kind of like the pot calling the kettle black a little bit, because I contributed to this. So there is a news story that appeared with my name on it on the Athletic website on Saturday afternoon that says Matt Rhule. No, that's the wrong story. This one says Nebraska Matt Rhule planned to scratch Huskers spring game. And let me explain, because that is essentially the case. They are canceling the scrimmage portion of the spring event, which we know as the spring game. But that wasn't necessarily my intention to feed into this when I left Memorial Stadium. And when we talked, we did a pod that posted at 2 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. And you and I talked about the spring and what Rhule said and these tampering allegations a bit during that show. I thought the bigger issue, the bigger topic, the bigger takeaway from Saturday was Rhule's conversation, Rhule's comments about special teams. And we addressed that too. So as I do on Saturday afternoons, I had a baseball practice to coach at 3:30. And yes, it was indoors. For those people who do not, I get these questions a lot in the winter when it's like 6 degrees outside. Like, you had baseball practice? What do you? I mean, we go inside. It's inside. If you don't live in the world of youth baseball, which I do for another 6 months, you may not know that.
They have those buildings now.
So I was leaving my house with my 14-year-old and all of our gear to head to baseball practice at about 3:10, and I received a note from our news desk, our collection of news editors at The Athletic, and it was a link to an ESPN article saying that Nebraska had canceled the spring game. It was a wire story that Eric Olson had written, and he was sitting right behind me at the press conference which happened 5 hours earlier at 10 a.m. And it said, "Is this? Do you know about this?" That was the message that was sent to me by the editing crew. And I said, "Yeah, this was actually announced on Wednesday by the athletic director, and they're not officially canceling anything yet. They're just trending in that direction." He said it was highly doubtful. So, I didn't really view this as a big news item. So we had a discussion, and there were several people involved in the discussion, and we decided that it was appropriate for me to write a story about Nebraska's plans to cancel the spring game. So that's kind of the direction that these things go. That's kind of how this stuff happens for me. And I wrote it this way. The bigger issue was Rhule's comments about tampering.
Yeah.
And that's how it appeared on our site. But once that happens, once it's on ESPN, once it's on The Athletic, I know On3 nationally created a headline about this too. Then, like, the aggregating accounts, the college football accounts, some of the writers on the national level who were, of course, not in Lincoln on Saturday, they see this and they run with it. And it's like, oh my God, can you believe Nebraska, of all places, which draws 60,000 annually to its spring game, is canceling it because of tampering? What does this world come to?
Yep.
So that's how we got to where we are.
There are like 2 or 3. There's more, but I could think of a few right off the top of my head. Just lightning rod words where if a coach says it right now in 2025, it's getting traction no matter what. And tampering is one of them.
And he said it. I can remember an instance in the old days of Nebraska football where a coach made some allegations about tampering, like basically suggested that there was tampering that had occurred. And this is when I worked at ESPN, and I wrote a story that said this coach, it was Scott Frost, alleged tampering, and they were not pleased. Nebraska was not pleased. Frost was not pleased. Like, you don't want to have that word attributed to you
if you didn't say
unless
it.
You actually say it.
Yep.
And Matt Rhule, he said tampering during his comments to the media on Saturday.
People must have Google alerts on for anytime anyone says tampering, it just pops up on their phone. Well, Matt Rhule said it, time to make a big, I'd be like I said, I felt like the comment was relatively innocuous. And I think he went on to clarify that there's several other reasons that they do something like that. But like you said, Mitch, I think he was probably looking for an excuse to talk about it a little bit and didn't mind the conversation being started afterwards, I don't think.
No, it's kind of like he has a tendency to be, he has a special skill to be able to do this. And you remember a year ago, he talked about quarterbacks being able to command $1 million around college football. Now you have interior offensive linemen commanding $1 million. And I know that Rhule got a lot of pushback from coaches out there in the coaching community. Like, people messaged him and said, "What are you doing saying this about $1 million? Now I got my former 4-star who's coming in saying, am I supposed to be getting paid $1 million? Or, every time some quarterback visits out of the portal, they expect $1 million." But Rhule knows how to push buttons. We've certainly discussed that before about him being a button pusher. And this was another instance of that kind of caught fire in the news cycle on Saturday.
All right. We'll come back and round this thing out with a little bit of hoops talk as Nebraska is potentially back in the picture for the NCAA tournament after this.
Wow.
That's right, Mitch. It didn't take long. Nebraska goes on the road and beats Oregon. In fact, they had a lovely week last week in basketball after losing 6 in a row. People thinking all hope was lost. What is going to happen? They were 2-7 in the league, and then they rip off 2 consecutive wins, one at home, one on the road, one in the home, one in overtime against 2 ranked teams, moving them back to 14-8 and 4-7 in the league. And now people looking at the schedule and saying that it's relatively manageable. And the people who make brackets and things like that saying, hey, don't forget about Nebraska. They have now beaten 4 ranked teams. They have a whole bunch of quad 1 wins. Man, life can change fast in college basketball.
So was this the most unlikely week? And I guess it wasn't all one week because the Sunday thing, this was Sunday. But if you consider a week Monday through Sunday, yeah, it was a week. Yeah. Is this like the most unlikely week in recent Nebraska basketball history? I can't go back to the Danny Nee era and remember specific weeks, but what the heck, man? You just looked completely non-competitive in the previous game to Illinois coming in. Remember the Wisconsin game, which was last weekend, a week ago, and Nebraska barely showed up, and then you come out and beat 2 ranked teams in a matter of 3 days.
Here's how I would put it. I talked about this on my show a little bit after the Illinois game. So I guess it would have been Friday. Like when they lost the 6 in a row, I would take, like, they could have beaten Rutgers. Obviously the defense was tough during that. They played relatively well at Maryland, well enough to win, generally well enough to win against USC, except for a couple plays late. And then obviously the Iowa one, they were in control until they blew it in the last several minutes of the game. So like, if you play those 6 games over again, Nebraska doesn't lose 6 in a row. So it's like, it's never as bad as you think it is. And now they've beaten a couple ranked teams in a row. And I watched them play Oregon, last night. And I think people watched it and they're like, man, that didn't seem that hard. Or Nebraska obviously was a lot more locked in on the defensive side of the ball than they were for a lot, for big swaths of that 6-game stretch there where they lost all 6 of them. So you got to give them credit, but I didn't feel like it was this huge mismatch going on the road to beat a top 25 team. and so I think that tells you a lot about, just sort of the randomness and how it comes down to, just a couple plays at the end of games sometimes. And it should tell you that Nebraska's got a chance to rip off some wins here. It's never as bad as you think it is. And it's probably never as good as it seems to be when it's good either. So I don't know. They do have a chance here in February and March to get themselves back in the conversation.
I get all of that, but 2 of those losses were brutal.
Really
the
bad.
Purdue loss and
Wisconsin
the Wisconsin loss.
Yep.
Yeah. And then you throw out the Michigan State earlier. That was back in December. That's another one. So like they had shown 3 times the tendency to just not compete, which is a red flag. And we'll see. Maybe that team won't show up for the rest of the year, and it'll just be the team that we saw on Thursday and on Sunday. And if that's the case, they are going to make the NCAA tournament. Nebraska they're staying out west, right? You don't go to Oregon on
we-
Sunday late in the day. I mean, that game was scheduled later in the day. It was a 6:30 start Central Time, and they're playing at Washington on Wednesday. So got to be staying out west, getting some nice time out there in the Seattle area, and then they play Wednesday. Washington is last in the league at 2-8 in the Big Ten standings, 11-10 overall. Now they've played all right at home, been competitive against top teams in the league, so it's not like Nebraska can expect to just walk into Washington and get a win. And at this point, honestly, like a split out there would be real disappointing. You went into it thinking that would be something you would strive for, but if you can beat Oregon on the road, man, you got to win. Let's say this is a real opportunity for Nebraska because it's now 4-7 in the Big Ten and has a chance to win on Wednesday. And then there are 2 home games stacked after that against Ohio State on Sunday, on Super Bowl Sunday, and Maryland at home the week that follows. So Nebraska could actually win 5 in a row if it takes care of business, Connor, and be 7-7. And where are you then on February 13th? You're 500 in the league.
I just don't want to fall into that trap. It very well could happen, but that's kind of what I'm saying. Like I don't think there's a whole lot of variance in between what they showed for a few of those losses in the 6-game losing streak to what they've shown in the 2 games that they won against top 25 teams last week. So they're certainly capable of losing all of the next 3 that they play as well. And if that's the case, then your season is taking a completely different tone to it. But right now you've worked yourself back into the conversation, which is great. And I think for me, it just happened a lot faster than I thought. They'd have to really grind their way back to, all right, that looks a little bubbly. They could be that type of team, but you're right. There is absolutely a path to them working their way back to 500 in the blink of an eye here, which is, an amazing feat. I will also say about them, the jerseys that they wore at Oregon were horrendous.
Awful.
Thank you.
It was awful. Were they pajamas?
I don't know.
What was that?
Bad. Very bad.
Saw Dana Altman. That was cool. I don't in the Big Ten, Dana Altman. What's going on?
In your stance, bending his knees, doing his thing. Good.
Okay, lots of talk on the Big Ten Network about Wilbur, Nebraska, during the broadcast.
Yeah, the guys in the Big Ten Network. I don't think. I think that was their one line that they kind of knew. They were like, "Oh yeah, Dana, he's from Nebraska," and then that was kind of it.
So when Nebraska plays like this, we'll finish the conversation here. When Nebraska plays like this, and it kind of gets to that top level that this team has, the engine that makes them work more clear than ever. It's Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary. So 51 points combined between those two. And they kind of took turns being just the best player on the court, which I don't know if Oregon's got like a first round NBA projected pick. Maybe there's probably some guy in Oregon who is a better player. Maybe not. Okay.
I mean, Shellstad's pretty good, but not going to be a first round pick.
I just mean like Williams and Gary were the best players on the court last night for those 40 minutes. Yes. And they took turns. You just continued to see it. Some of the shot that Bryce hit, it was lucky in the first half where he banked in the 3 and it was a 4-point play. And like Gary was a beast on the glass, and he was making shots that, during that 6-game losing streak, you were like, putting your hands over your eyes when he was taking these shots. Like, what are you doing? And they were going in on Sunday night in Eugene. So, hey, like, ride the wave. They've got momentum now. They've beaten 2 consecutive ranked teams. They're staying on the road. They ought to feel really good about themselves. They got a couple days to rest up before playing a team that is there for them to get. And then you come back home. So life has returned. We threw dirt on them. We said the season was over. We said they were past the point of no return, that they had multiple games that were must wins that they lost. And here 1 week later, we're like, forget we said all of that. That's just college basketball.
Ride the wave. I think that's a great way to put it, Mitch. I think Nebraska basketball fans are very, very used to that over the years. So get locked in for a fun February and potentially March as well. That'll do it for us today here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Big Ten, where Craig puts the Big Ten first. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.